G'day, welcome to another frothy episode of Frothy Friday. If you don't know what it is, it's just me having a yarn about whatever pops into my head. If you've ever been travelling as an Australian, people ask you, have you got kangaroos in your backyard? And usually, as a travelling Aussie, you will bullshit and you'll tell them that, sure, you have kangaroos, you have koalas and all sorts. But I don't have to bullshit anymore. Check out those frothers. And I live just in that loft thing there. See the door open? Often I'll just crank open the big sliding door and they'll just be waiting there looking at me going, what is this Derek doing? Yep. What's my yarn today? I should mention that the country I'm on is Yugambeh country. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It is beautiful here and I'm very grateful that I live right here. And my yarn today is about a mischievous tooth that still lives in the back of my mouth. And I cracked him in half on New Year's Eve on a dried mushroom. And when I cracked it, I kind of wigged out a little bit, probably because I'd had a few other dried mushrooms, a few drinks. For those playing at home who do tokens, it was a nay the next day because I just thought I was entitled to party really hard, and when you mix plant medicines with booze and entitlement, they tend to kick your ass. Anyway, I did have heaps of fun time though with the friends. It was good. It was just that next morning is like not ideal, and last part of the night was a bit of a blank. But back to the tooth. The tooth cracked, and I turned to my friend and he said, "Oh, maybe something's trying to tell you something there." And I was like, "Yeah, maybe it is." Anyway, me being a wuss and not going to the dentist for about 6 months, not a good idea. But actually, probably get the kangaroos. Probably I prefer to watch the kangaroos than you, mate. So we'll keep them there. And yeah, here's the interesting thing. Between the 2 sessions at the dentist, just before I book the dentist, and then my tooth starts to flare up. It's like screaming at me, like, "Benny, I know what you're doing. You're gonna get rid of me, aren't you?" And it's really annoying. And I noticed that once I go to the first session, I don't book the second one because, they say book it in, and I hesitate, as you do, because no one really likes a dentist. And the pain goes away. The week goes past and I'm like, okay, let's call them back up and book it in. So I book it in, and then the pain comes back. And now I went to the dentist today and it feels like the pain is subsiding. What will happen once I actually book it in to get it ripped out? Because it needs to go. I can feel it sort of like stinging now as I talk about it, as I'm directing my consciousness to my half-broken tooth. So what does that tell you about systems and things which you plan to rip out, or you plan to break up with, or you plan to, hope that doesn't trigger anything that doesn't need to come out. I was watching my words there. That's curious. Why do I need to watch my words? Fuck that. So yeah, that's got me thinking. It's down this little thought process of like when you need to take something out, it's gonna try and hold on, right? There's gonna be all sorts of self-doubt, and whether that's subconscious or consciously, like felt pain. No, don't take this tooth out. You've been with me for years, but it needs to go. It needs to go. I've been having quite a few good yarns this week. Some really powerful yarns. I actually went to a Yarn Australia event at the end of last week and sat around with a bunch of Indigenous Australians and non-Indigenous Australians, and had some beautiful conversations around our stories. And what I really love is that kind of exploration that I have an ancestry as well. And what is that? And I don't know if we, as settler Australians, as white settler Australians, embrace the fact that, we can dive into that. And there was a beautiful Irish singer. She was talking about her hometown in Ireland and Ireland itself being colonised. And I was also actually having a yarn with my mate Ian, who's a comedian. So it's always a good funny laugh, but he was telling us about the IRA and Bloody Sunday and all these things, and it's like, it's not just, it kind of just brings home that, you know, there's been pain and all sorts throughout the world of people rolling over other people. And the other thing is that, you know, at some point within the lineage of your history, you were probably dispossessed in some way, which is something to ponder on and something to think about, because we're obviously holding generations of trauma. Maybe not obviously, because maybe that's just obvious in my reality and the things that I read, but it feels true. And I think like it's quite big at the moment, because, you know, you've got the documentary that came out with Gabor Mate, who is phenomenal. I love to listen to him. And I was having a yarn with one of my other mentors the other day, and she was telling me about how she thought the movie was kind of not as awesome as it could be, because there was two conflicting narratives between Gabor Mate, the dude and the legend, and what he'd done, and then the poorly executed, possibly not the right word there, but the way that we deal with trauma within Western civilizations. Which is great, because there's always swirling dovetails. If you could have a swirling dovetail, I challenge someone who's good with the art to draw a swirling dovetail. The trauma conversation dropped into how I listen to this podcast called The Emerald, which I've probably talked about every single time I do one of these Frothy Fridays. And I'm talking about how trauma, and they reference Gabor Mate, and they reference a couple of my other mentors, which is cool, and how trauma was dealt with in many societies, or not even dealt with. It was just it wasn't called trauma for one. It was just inbuilt into the ceremonies of the time that you would deal with it in certain ways, through conversations, through dance, through music, through bloodletting, through harm, which is an interesting one. If you think about self-harming, if there's generational thoughts behind that, or lineage as that being an effective part of trauma response, that's a bit of a deep rabbit hole that I haven't explored enough to make a comment on, but just the mere fact that that exists still is an interesting thread to pull on when it comes to trauma. So I guess that's been top of mind with me this week. Generational trauma is interesting when I have the ability just to have a conversation with my old man about what happened with him growing up. And I was always fascinated because, or not always fascinated, but there's history of alcoholism in my family, and aggressive alcoholism, and the trauma one feels when they see their mother being beaten up by their father is undeniable, right? And didn't know I was going to go here with this conversation. And I was asking my dad, who we don't have super long conversations, but we had a real long one the other day, and I was like, did you ever get between Pop and Nan? And he said, yeah, I did, and I copped a busted nose and a busted lip. And I was like, fuck, what does that do? That was a lot. And it's interesting to know those things, because, you know, I come from my father and my mother, who both had grew up in similar situations, you know. And it's interesting that when people get together, what do they get together over? And perhaps that was the thread, and perhaps that thread wasn't strong enough to keep them in a loving relationship. Ooh, getting real deep. Let's look at some kangaroos. So yeah, that's why I do these Frothy Fridays, because they allow me to compute a lot of information, and I dislike the fact that I use the word compute. However, I did. But I'm glad I'm out in nature. A lot of the time I record these and I'm just sitting inside. And usually it's a sunny day and it's overcast today, so I'm glad that I'm out here chatting through some stuff, looking at some kangaroos, and very grateful for the fact that I'm going to get to hang out with the legends who are the custodians of this property, and yeah, have a good meal and have some really good yarns. Oh, and one last thing. I think I'm feeling tension in my body because I haven't surfed this week and haven't honoured the fact that I need to move. And when I see things, once I haven't been moving, I'm quicker to judge and, yeah, see the negative, like the negative in the comment that gets sent to me in an email, even though it wasn't a negative comment. And so that's just an observation that I've had. So even though you know and you do your coaching certificates and all that crap, it's not crap. How often and easy it is just to slip into a old pattern of just getting up and jumping on the computer and then jumping on a Zoom call and jumping on another Zoom call and not having good boundaries and then eating heaps of chips. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'm just going to sit here for a while in silence after this because that's also helpful. Much love.